Welcome back to another SnowRunner truck review. Today we're going to take a look at an old tank carrier from the 1970s. This truck is the predecessor of the Derry Longhorn 4520, but it still has rivaling capabilities. So before we start, I ask that you please help support the channel by liking the video and subscribe to the channel as well. Alright, so without further ado, let's jump into it and check it out. The Oshkosh M911 was built in the late 70s in response to the US Army requiring capable tank carriers with low maintenance costs. With a Detroit diesel turbocharged engine, the M911 could carry payloads of almost 70 tons. The US Army procured 1,000 of these trucks with the purpose of hauling the M47 Patton and other equipment. In the game, the Derry Longhorn 3194 isn't the most popular prime mover, but recently the truck was given some quality of life upgrades that provided a large performance increase. The Derry is a heavy, bulky, stable tractor that can haul some pretty heavy payloads. So before we get into those pros and cons, let's take a look at the base stats. The Derry Longhorn 3194 is classified as a heavy truck. It weighs 22 tons. In its stock configuration, it boasts a power to weight of B+, a durability of A-, fuel consumption B-, fuel capacity is 370 liters or 98 gallons. It comes with a stock suspension. Its tires also come stock with a 52-inch highway tire. Its all-wheel drive is always on, and its diff lock is always on as well. Alright, let's dive into the pros and cons of the Derry Longhorn 3194. Per usual, with the bad news first, coming in at downside number 1, front overhang. In our time reviewing trucks, we've seen some very large front overhangs in previous reviews. Although its overhang isn't the worst, it is still very much present, and drivers will notice hang-ups and engine damage hits. With terrain elevations changing rapidly on this off-road adventure, this downside will make navigating the wilderness a little bit more challenging. Downside number 2, ground clearance and no raised suspension option. Having a large front overhang can be pretty frustrating, but coupled with a lack of ground clearance and no raised suspension option can negatively affect performance, as we know. Both Derry Longhorns lack the suspension option, and their ground clearances aren't the best as well, which we know equates to elevated ground resistance in those deep areas. Downside number 3, the dead axle. Quite some time ago, Sabre made 2 changes to the Derry that helped the vehicle's performance. The first is the dead axle. The second change we'll talk about a little bit later. I believe around phase 1, the axle was secretly changed. Before, the axle was fully extended and could not be retracted. Being that this axle had no power, it added a lot of off-road resistance due to simply being drugged through the elements. However, from recent changes, this can now be lifted up into the vehicle's frame. This does help a lot, but in those severe conditions, it can add resistance and cause the vehicle to high center. Again, being that this axle has no power, it would be nice to have the option to remove it to mitigate ground resistance and hang-ups. Downside number 4, maneuverability. To make this one short, the Derry is a very large heavy truck with slow steering speed and a very large turning circle. Unlike its brother, the 4520, it's simply not as agile with multiple turn axles. In this case, drivers might have to take a little extra time when you're maneuvering in those tight spots. Downside number 5, varied fuel consumption. Throughout my experiments with trying to make fuel consumption better, I have noticed that the high-range gearbox will cause elevated burn values due to an increased RPM cap. To make this one as simple as I can, the high-range gearbox will burn more fuel than the off-road gearbox, due to the difference in RPM caps. With this knowledge, the variation between both gearboxes is going to be range and time. I don't feel like the Derry burns a ton of fuel, but I can't pin it as efficient while having those sporadic values. Overall, I think it has good range for drivers. And finally, coming in at downside number 6, utility. I'm not going to spend much time on this downside, but in short, the Derry can only use a high or low saddle, making it very limited in its use for drivers. although I do have to say it is nice to see a heavy class truck with the capability to equip a low saddle. Well folks, as you can see, there are some large hurdles to overcome. However, the Derry does have some impressive qualities. Here are the pros for the Derry Longhorn 3194. Coming in at upside number 1, power, all-wheel drive, and differential locking. The Derry has good power with the Westline V12 engine and has always boasted the always-on all-wheel drive feature as well. However, the second change that Sabre implemented secretly was the addition of the always-on differential locking. Without saying too much, always-on all-wheel drive and diff lock are always performance boosters in the game of SnowRunner. Upside number 2, liftable dead axle. Previously mentioned on our downsides list, the dead axle poses challenges as we have explained. However, the changes made to lift this axle had to be mentioned on the upsides list as well. Without the always-on differential locking and the option to lift this dead axle, the Derry would have been one of the least used trucks in the game. Ever since these additions, drivers have been giving this truck a second chance and having great success. Upside number 3, weight. The Derry is one of the heavier trucks in the game, which we already know will benefit the vehicle's grip when paired with our number 1 upside. To be brief, the 3194 has increased grip value, and according to my research, the vehicle is in the top 10 when it comes to weight. Upside number 4, tires. Unlike its brother, the 4520, the Derry cannot use mud tires, but I don't think it holds it back much, if at all. The dually OHD 52-inch tires are 2 inches larger than its successor, and they have good weight, which further adds to the vehicle's grip. Upside number 5, stability. Due to lack of popularity and overall lack of use, not a lot of players realize how stable the Derry actually is. Upon diving into the game files, I found that 3/4 of the vehicle's weight is in its chassis. Out of all the trucks I've reviewed, this one was the most surprising when testing. In short, it's pretty stable for sure. And finally, coming in at upside number 6, it's free. It's always nice getting a free truck, but for this one, you gotta do some work for it on Alaska's White Valley map. It's actually not the easiest task to complete, but with some smart play, it can be done without too many hiccups. It's well known that the Derry Longhorns aren't the cheapest trucks in the game, so getting a free truck from completing a task is definitely worth noting. Alright, so moving on to my personal ratings for this vehicle. For power, I gave it a 4 because despite being very heavy, it still boasts good power. For terrain navigation, a rating of 3. If it had better clearances to reduce high centers or nose collisions, this rating would be higher. Most players would find this vehicle easy to use, but some new players might not be as patient with the lack of maneuverability. For aesthetics, it's a good looking military truck, but I still love the 4520's look over this. In this department, the truck is somewhat of a dark horse. It's surprisingly stable, and I believe it can be trusted. I felt that a rating of 4 was very generous. A massive fuel tank helped this score, however, the consumption rate is somewhat sporadic at times. Overall, it has pretty good range. It's pleasing that the Derry can use the low saddle setup, giving it more use, but still it's limited in what it can offer other than semi-trailers. Heavy weight, good power, always on all-wheel drive and differential locking, as well as large 52-inch OHD tires provides great traction while off-roading. So in conclusion, the Derry Longhorn 3194 outperforms its successor, the 4520. I haven't done much testing on the 4520's new engine in the Phase 6 maps, but as it stands, the 3194 objectively does better due to the always-on features and larger tires. I'm actually glad I waited to review this truck because of those 2 developer changes that really helped the vehicle's performance. The ability to lift the dead axle and the addition of the always-on differential locking really changes the Derry from being a throwaway truck to a trustworthy heavy hauler. In comparison between both Derry Longhorns, the 4520 is superior in weight, agility, and utility by having the capability to haul long logs. Even though the 4520 got a new engine in Phase 6, I don't feel that it's going to outperform the 3194. I think the difference maker is the always-on features. Having always-on all-wheel drive and differential locking is always going to be advantageous in off-road scenarios over the switchable features. I actually prefer the switchable features, but the key is differential locking. The 3194 has access to that feature in any gear setting, while the 4520 needs to use low gears to use it. Overall, I believe they are both good trucks, and I'm pleased that they have received some upgrades to bring back their popularity. So in closing, the Derry Longhorn 3194 has limited uses, but it is a strong off-roader within its limitations. It's super stable, heavy, and capable. It might struggle in those bumpy, rocky spots, but if you need tons of cargo delivered safely, try it out and let me know what you think. I hope this review gave you a fresh, new perspective of the Derry Longhorn 3194. Please smash the like button. Definitely share this video with someone who is struggling with the game, and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any future content. Hope y'all have a wonderful day, God bless, and stay upright.